This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Dan O'Brien, K-State grain economist, begins our Friday show with his grain market update. He shares how the markets have seen a lot of movement recently. The show continues with Raj Khosla, Department Head of Agronomy at K-State, as he discusses a grant that will help with research in understanding nitrogen use efficiency in wheat. This is a partnership between Kansas State University and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Meteorologist at K-State, Chip Redmond, completes this week's show with a weather update. He says while these temperatures have been high, they haven't been record-breaking. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Friday show as we normally do with a grain market update. And as always, we're joined by K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
Starting off this grain market conversation, as we normally do, with talking about what are futures doing.
Well, in this most recent 2 weeks, we've been up, down, sideways, and all over the place. Here on yesterday's markets, after a lot of volatility earlier on and 1 or 2 days of really dropping sharply, September corn, 23 corn closed at $4.80, down 30, 40 plus cents from where it had been not too long ago. Deese corn, the new crop harvest contract, closed at $4.93 and a half on Thursday, and again that's down below $5. And in looking at where that September contract has gone, if you look at recent charts, in essence, it's gone back down to recent lows. So when a market and futures traders don't know exactly where to go other than direction, they pay attention to where they've been historically. And back in early July, we had gotten down to just about this very same level, about 480. There is a move lower down to 471, 472. So this day, as we're talking about this, is a pretty important day. We're testing historic lows or recent history lows in these contracts, and this is the battle of the bulls and the bears. And in the last bit of time, the negative sentiment has prevailed, and I think just overall, for corn, driven by some rains that have come, generally more optimism on the condition of the crop, et cetera. I think as I kind of struggle with that direction on all that to understand, I don't know if the recent rains are enough to overcome any damage that was done earlier. I think a week from today, when we have the August 11th USDA crop production and WASDE report, we'll find out what farmers have told the USDA they think they'll have, but the USDA will have not gotten out into the fields and surveyed what they actually see. Then in September, there'll be another survey of farmers, and actually the USDA will send their enumerators out, their plot checkers, and they'll have all that much more probably sound numbers. So August 11th will be important, but that September report, I think, will be all that much more important. That'll be the first time we've gotten out in the field to see what's going on. So that's kind of the situation with corn futures. For soybean futures, they had also dropped considerably from where they had been. The lead August contract now is of course, it's in its delivery time frame, closed at 14.28 3/4. September, what we're pricing off of now at elevators, 13.82, and those contracts were upper 14 to 15 not that long ago. A little different situation with soybeans in that we had at the top of this recent run for the September contract, 14.90, something like that, and now we're more than $1 below that. So we closed yesterday at 13.82. We had seen a low of about 13.35 or so not that long ago. Another one at about 12.75. If soybeans keep dropping down to those levels, then you'd wonder about a change in market direction. And there is some risk of that. Again, August is, if we have good conditions, the market can perceive that we'll have a large crop, all that much larger of a crop. And you could see soybeans going lower. Wheat is just like corn, as far as I see on the futures. We had gotten to highs of about 925 or so within the last 2 weeks on the high side, and now yesterday closed at 767.5, and that happens to match a low we had gotten down to in late May coming into June. And there's another low below that at about 740. So I guess we're all chartists now, as we start watching these price moves. And again, I think what you're looking at is a situation where the market is groping to figure out where to go price wise, and with that you do see the market paying attention to where it has been historically for lows, and at least stops and looks in most cases to assess, is this trend something we should continue? Should we break what's current history or not? So interesting to look at all that. I might add in, if that's okay, since we're talking wheat, winter wheat harvest pretty well done. In fact, the main thing right now for winter wheat is that we have some reports of some wheat being imported in, hard red winter wheat being imported into the U.S. Of course, that has the attention of hard red winter wheat growers without question. So we see that, understand that, and that's going to work itself out. Spring wheat has been affected by hot, dry conditions up in Canada. And you look at the most recent ratings for spring wheat, and you've got South Dakota showing about 30% poor to very poor, 42% just fair. And North Dakota, the other big player there, 18% poor to very poor, 38% just fair. I guess you're coming into the place where you're just beginning harvest in those areas, and then we'll answer the question, has the heat that's come in late really affected those crops or not? So I guess we're in weather markets on the one hand and still watching Ukraine, Russia to see what goes on. I would add in on that. It wasn't but a few days ago that Russia had said, we're not going to go forward with that no matter what. Well, we keep hearing of discussions of perhaps one way or another to have some type of agreement, or at least to be able to see Ukrainian crops flow out of that part of the world. So, we could talk this whole session on that, and Antonina Boyaca could do a lot better job and with all the details of it. So point is that the world still is bouncing up and down in its feed grain, in its wheat markets, and oilseeds being affected too by what happens in Ukraine, and whether this country that's been called historically the breadbasket of Europe, whether they're able to grow crops first and export them second. And of course, they're doing that in the middle of a military conflict, and that's just causing all sorts of problems.
Dan, seeing a ton of movement right now for many different factors, and is that movement also carrying over into cash market?
Well, yes. As the futures have dropped off, of course, see that the basis levels in most cases haven't changed that much. So as the futures have dropped, you keep about the same local basis, and we've seen prices fall. It's interesting that for corn, the top price in the state, $5.81 in Garden City, about $1 over basis. Second highest price, $5.67 in the Columbus area. Colby out of $5.61 at 80 over, and then other, Topeka, Hutchinson, et cetera, all doing decently. You still have some movement in grain sorghum. I'll try to expedite and say this quickly. Grain sorghum prices all have a positive basis. Strongest bids in Topeka and Columbus at 25 over the futures. So interesting to watch that. Soybean bids, they were 14 plus. Now they're all along the line of 1350 to 1390, something like that in these areas across the state that we're watching. Some pretty decent basis bids actually in Colby and Hutchinson. So go figure, with Colby having a strong basis bid. And for wheat prices now with the drop off in futures, we're basically seeing a range of the top price, Salina 752, lowest price, Colby 702, and just variation in between. So our farmers, as they have wheat in hand, we've come into this time frame. Prices have softened during harvest time, and those that have cash flow needs will no doubt probably move some wheat, to generate some revenues. Others probably storing that, wondering where we'll go down the line. And for those that are storing these issues of the possibility or seemingly reports that wheat might be coming into the country really is a pretty important thing in their viewpoint.
And something focusing kind of on corn, and something that pairs with that is ethanol. And a recent report came out about that from the USDA.
with the drought we had last year, Kansas corn prices at ethanol plants were strongest in the nation by far, except perhaps Nebraska being near them. And it now turns out this year that the strength in ethanol plant bids is more in Iowa, heading to the east. And that, it kind of matches up with what the drought maps are showing, as there are more concerns there locally for having adequate supplies. So just for instance, for August the 3rd, the average Kansas ethanol plant price was $5.38, a range of $5.10 to $5.63, but the average prices in Illinois, Indiana, eastern and western Iowa all were running $5.48 up to $5.77. Strongest prices actually in the whole country on average in Ohio at $5.81. So just a tale of where the drought's hitting or not. And again, as you look out here in Kansas, we're generally optimistic with the moisture we've had of having supply, so that affects the bids.
So overall, as we look at this market, seeing a ton of movement, and can producers expect to see that moving forward?
With these USDA reports coming up, I guess I would think that this next report, probably the USDA without their own surveys, probably not likely to make a lot of changes in the yields. But where I guess both the risk and opportunity are would be when we get the September WASDE report, the October report, and if it turns out that there's a surprise, again, this corn damage earlier in the year that we couldn't overcome, et cetera, then you're looking at potential for higher prices. It's just thought-provoking to remember how in a number of years here of late, the lowest corn price that we'd seen in a number of these years came around September 1st, as the market had kind of given up hope, of a short crop, and yet we hadn't seen the buyers really come in and start buying yet. So if we are heading for a low, I wouldn't be surprised that first part of September before that USDA WASDE report has been historically kind of where we have been seeing them.
Dan, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and give us our grain market update.
Thank you very much, Shelby. I appreciate it.
That was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Friday show now, discussing a $310,000 grant that was received by Raj Khosla, the head of K-State's Department of Agronomy. And to talk about that grant and what the purpose of it is Raj Khosla. Raj, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, good morning, and pleasure to be here. Yeah, we're very excited about this grant that we are able to garner from bilateral agreement on research and development from Israel.
$310,000 is a fair amount of money to work on some research here. And so really, how did this grant come together?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because we started talking about a mutual collaboration a few years back. I was visiting Israel, and one of the young scientists who is, similar to like my mentee, approached me that he would like to collaborate with my laboratory. And we sat down and discussed what could be potential ideas. Now, my lab has done a lot of research in the area of precision agriculture, enhancing nitrogen use efficiency and water use efficiency with irrigated corn for a long, long time. And so we said, hey, if you're interested in doing some work in that regard, I'll be happy to collaborate with you. And so that short conversation evolved, and we started looking for what are the avenues where there may be some funding available on both sides of the ocean that can bring us together for us to collaborate. And lo and behold, this organization, BARD, has a call every year that comes around this time of the year that brings scientists from the United States and the scientists from Israel to come and co-create new knowledge, new innovation, and further agriculture and many other disciplines. I'm heavily vested in agriculture, so we put a proposal together focused on enhancing nitrogen use efficiency and irrigated corn systems in both countries, and that was 2 years back. And interestingly, it was shot down, and one of the major feedback they had for us that why are you considering corn? Why not, wheat, a more important crop for the state of Israel, and maybe for Kansas as well. And that was an interesting, moment because, why not work on wheat? Now, a full disclosure here that my entire career has been in precision ag. But the primary focus of the crop has been corn or maize. And that's what prompted us to continue to work and create new science with maize and nitrogen and water use efficiency. So that's why we had chosen corn. But we had an aha moment. We said, hey, how about, it may be time for us to learn a thing or two about wheat. And we started tossing that idea, and we decided last year that let's go ahead and put a proposal focused on wheat crop, enhancing nutrient use efficiency, particularly nitrogen. And that's how it came together. And we heard the good news a month back or so that we are funded.
So this is a collaboration between Kansas State University and Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And so as a team, what are you guys planning on working on?
The way this project works is that we set up an experiment here in the state of Kansas and almost an identical experiment in Israel with our collaborator. That way we're collecting data from two locations almost at the same time. Okay, wheat crop is prominent in Kansas. Wheat crop is prominent in Israel. And so our collaborator and their graduate students and students who are engaged in this project will be establishing this experiment, the treatments, will be investigating the hypothesis that we have put together in our proposal, and will conduct experimentation in those locations. It is possible that we may set up a couple of locations here in Kansas, and they may do a couple of locations there too. But whatever we do, we try to mimic each other so that we can further science together that's beneficial for them as well as for us.
And you mentioned earlier, you're kind of practiced well in precision agriculture. And so how do you see this factoring in there?
Yeah, so my program has been working in precision ag since mid-90s. And primary focus of our work has been quantifying spatial and temporal variability in crops and in soil. And we have used that fundamental knowledge to make a difference in how we manage our nitrogen and water today. Water is precious all over the planet and couldn't be a better place than Kansas. We know how dry it gets here and how precious water is and how limited our aquifer Ogallala is. And so how do we further the duty of water? How do we apply the right input at the right time, at the right place, in the right amount, and in the right manner, practicing the 5 R's of precision agriculture? So we said to ourselves, hey, we have learned a thing or two about corn and how we manage water and how we manage nitrogen there. Could we extrapolate some of the learnings? Instead of starting over from square one, could we extrapolate some of the learnings from our ongoing work focused on corn and give it a try on wheat? We realized those are two very different crops, and they behave differently, their growth pattern development. So this would be a learning curve. But I'm teaming up with other wheat specialists here in the state so that we continue to enhance science and make discoveries for better management of nitrogen and water for our crop production systems.
And talking about your knowledge on corn, something you've worked a lot on and have spent many years on, so hopefully having a bit of a jump start into your research on wheat.
I would agree there. So our program deploys a lot of sensors and sensing technology so that we can sense water or soil moisture and nitrates in soil, hopefully in near real time. Okay, and then we use that data to translate that data into information and finally into decisions so that we can make better management decisions for our crop. And that's precisely what we're thinking we will be doing with wheat. Our group has already started studying wheat and crop response to nitrogen levels. Where are the opportunities for us to make a difference? And so we're moving into full speed thinking how we're going to implement this project.
And so talking about implementing it, when do you think you might see some results for producers?
So this is a 3-year project. It's very typical in field studies that we want to replicate our work over time as well as over locations, so that we don't want to make recommendations something that's happened by a matter of chance. We want to make sure it's reproducible, it's replicated. So I would imagine that we will start learning from year 1. However, something that we feel very comfortable and confident about making recommendations would be at the culmination of this project in about 3 years of time.
And so obviously a lot of work is going to go into this. So what does it mean for Kansas producers or really producers across the world?
Yeah, so wheat is an interesting crop where I cannot think of a better example when it comes to nitrogen management, because if you were to apply too much nitrogen, more than what is needed by the crops tend to lodge, meaning the crop will fall down. Now, if you apply too little, it's not enough for the crop to attain its maximum or optimum yield potential. So it's a two-edged sword. If you apply too little, you're paying a cost. If you're applying too much, you're paying a cost. Also, nitrogen is directly related to protein content, and that's also a concern for our farmers in Kansas, that when they have high yields, oftentimes there's a dilution effect from nitrogen not being enough in the crop, that the protein content levels fall below acceptable market levels, and so they'll have to pay a penalty, not able to harness the best price that market may offer to them. So our project is not directly related to that aspect, but nitrogen and nitrogen use efficiency are directly related to that.
Sounds like this has been many years in the making and will continue to be many more years going forward as you do this research. So what makes you excited to work on this?
One, for sure, that our group will be working with a new crop. Two, working on a challenge that's so relevant for our producers and for the state of Kansas. Also, if you look at the big picture, where the USDA Agriculture Innovation Agenda that was presented in 2020 calls for, in the next 30 years, i.e. by 2050, we want to continue to increase our food production by 40% compared to the levels of 2020, but we want to do that with 50% reduction in our crop inputs such as nitrogen and water. Kansas is a leader in wheat. We're the wheat state, right? We're the number one wheat growing state in the union. We should demonstrate leadership in this area to the rest of the nation and to the world, as you said, by coming up with new techniques, technologies, methodologies, and practices that enhances yield while enhancing nitrogen use efficiency. So I think that's a very exciting element of our project.
Raj, I appreciate you coming in and giving us some more information about this $310,000 grant that you've received to look at nitrogen use efficiency in wheat.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
That was Raj Khosla, head of Kansas State University's Department of Agronomy. There was a K-State Research and Extension news release written on this topic, which I will link in today's show notes, which, as always, you can find on agtoday.net. We're getting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we return, we'll be joined by meteorologist Chip Redmond from Kansas State University as he gives us this week's weather update. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we finish this week's shows with a weather update. And as always, we're joined by K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And so looking at this past week, it's been pretty hot and dry.
Yeah, we definitely kept that thermostat up for most of the state, especially the southern half of the state. The north at least saw some relief a couple of days, especially over the weekend. And 100-degree heat was pretty common. We saw some high temperatures as much as 107. And so very warm conditions. And you know, when we had that ridge of high pressure built in, it also brought very dry conditions with it. And lower humidities were pretty common across state. You saw the vegetation start to dry out, too, as a result. Starting to see a lot of browning, especially the cool season grasses. And therefore, most of the state hasn't received much moisture this week.
Has some of the states seen some drought improvement?
Yeah, we did have a couple of rounds of storms go through the Northeast, and that was just enough at the right time period. Remember, drought cutoff is the Tuesday before the drought monitor is released. The new drought monitor released this Thursday had one tiny area of improvement, just D1 to D0. But otherwise, a lot of the state remains in a drought category, with the biggest non-drought area. It's still the far west.
And coming back to that heat real fast, it's not record-breaking heat, but it is still extremely hot.
Yeah, we saw some pretty impressive warm temperatures several days in a row. but we're in the warmest time of the year, so our average high temperatures are in the low to mid 90s, and our record high temperatures are 110, 115. So we can get really hot this time of year and nowhere near record heat.
This past Wednesday night, Manhattan saw some rain, but did any other parts of the state see rain?
Yeah, we saw rain mostly north of I-70, and the time this airs, we'll likely see another round of rain since then. Just isolated areas saw good amounts of rain, about a half inch. Otherwise, just a few raindrops to maybe a couple tenths of an inch, depending on where you're at.
Is that kind of teeing up the forecast to be entering another weather pattern?
Yeah, so our high pressure that has all this warm temperatures and dry conditions is basically getting shunted back to the south and east with another impinging front. And what that's going to do is we've had rounds of storms continuously go around the high pressure. And as that high pressure shrinks to our south, that brings the jet stream kind of through here and brings us into the rounds of storms. And so we're going to see chances of storms on and off for the next 3 to 4 or 5 days. And we'll likely see some severe weather with that just because we're going to get some more organization. And we could, in some isolated areas, even see some flooding concerns maybe in the northwest where they end up with 2, 3, maybe even localized more precipitation out of these events. Whereas it's kind of a June look too, where the storms would kind of start to dissipate as they got further east. And so as you get further east in the state, precipitation likelihood is a little bit lower, a little bit more uncertainty, and this is thunderstorm activity. So precipitation totals are going to vary greatly across very short distances.
As that rain comes in, is there going to be a break in temperature?
Yeah, with that ridge and high pressure diminishing and taking the heat south with it, we're going to get a lot more convection, a lot more cloud cover. That's going to really help take the edge off. Won't take the edge off the humidity component just with the precipitation we're going to see. We'll see continued high humidity, but temperatures are going to be easily 10, 15. We might not even get into the upper 80s on Sunday and Monday. So some definitely much needed cool relief coming.
And so looking even farther into August, kind of what does the forecast look like there?
Yeah, so I think this pattern is going to stay pretty consistent through the first part of next week with some rounds of storms and cooler weather. We'll start warming back up next week. We'll start to see things dry out by the end of the week. And I think a pretty dry mid-August is likely with probably above normal temperatures coming back around. Keep in mind, we are at our hottest time of the year right now, and we kind of cool off with every day, or at least every week right now. We get every day as we get later in the month. So we expect temperatures to start falling a little bit and not be as hot as we could see. But we can still see a lot of warm temperatures this time of year. Just climatologically, we see a downward trend.
Chip, I appreciate you coming in today and giving us another weather update.
Yep, thanks for having me.
That was Kansas State University meteorologist Chip Redmond. That's all I have for you this week on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you on Monday.